Hello and welcome to the SAP versus Oracle versus Microsoft Dynamics versus INFOR, Clash of the Titans 2019. I'm Laura Matyer-Florence. I'm a Director of Business Development here at Panorama Consulting, and I'm joined by my colleague, Chris DeVault.
And I can't flip.
We're having a slight technical difficulty. There we go. So Chris DeVault is our Manager of Software Selection.
Nice to meet everybody, and thanks for joining today. As Laura had mentioned, Manager of Software Selection here at Panorama, and been in the ERP industry for over 15 years now. Started off from the value-added reseller implementing system side, and now as an independent consultant.
So we really appreciate your joining us today, and in fact we have a special offer. If you watch all the way through, at the end we'll be offering a 1-hour complimentary consultation with our team for the first 3 respondents after the webinar. There's a place, if you go to our website, go to the Contact Me slide, there'll be a place for you to put in a code. So we'll give you the rest of those details at the end. Moving forward, the agenda for our webinar today, we're going to start with just a brief introduction to Panorama for those of you that have never spent time with us before. Then we'll review what the purpose of this next hour is going to be in terms of discussing the top Tier 1 software solutions out there. And then Chris is going to jump into the key findings from our research and getting into some of the nitty-gritty details on the 4 different solutions. And then finally, we will open it up at the end for questions, and we definitely welcome those. So quickly, who is Panorama? So we started about 15 years ago, originally as an ERP selection and implementation firm. And at that point, this is consulting speak, but at that point, it was kind of a blue ocean strategy to not be affiliated with any particular software, to be completely agnostic, completely independent. And we have maintained that independence through the current date. It was always part of our methodology when we were working with our clients to select and implement software to pay attention to the technology as well as the people and the process. So taking a look at organizational change, taking a look at the business processes as the work of the organization, and then finally looking at the technology as how that technology is going to support organizations in achieving their mission and vision. So you'll see here in terms of the services that we offer, starts with that system strategy. Digital transformation, it's kind of a buzzword out there and it means different things to different people, but typically what it means for our folks is companies will come to us and say, we want to take our organization to the next level. And whether that is a Blockbuster to Netflix change, or if it's just we have grown and we would like to take our organization to the next level, we'd like to scale, we'd like to go global, we'd like to open up a new business unit, whatever it takes, what is the digital technology that's necessary to support that goal? Then, of course, you've got our core service of software selection and implementation, and then organizational change, business process management. And sometimes folks come to us when things go sideways. So whether it's in the middle of a selection and they're looking for some validation, they want us to give them a rubber stamp on the decision and on the research they've done, or if they come to us for project management because their software implementation is not successful. So we can turn those projects around. And then at the end, if things go super sideways and you end up in litigation, we do provide expert witness services for both clients and software companies. So that speaks to our independence. Because we do the entire life cycle, because we see expert witness cases, we know where implementations fail. And so we can really make sure our implementation methodology is solid. Because we do implementations, we know what a solid foundation needs to be for selection. And so we've got a very solid software selection methodology as well. And again, it all comes back to what is the overarching strategy of the organizations to achieve their goals. In terms of the industries that we work with, we work across all industries. So manufacturing and distribution is the bread and butter because that's where ERP really started. But we have clients across all of these different areas, including municipalities, federal government organizations, nonprofit organizations, professional service organizations, across any industry. And what we find is that agnostic perspective that we bring in terms of technology, we also bring that agnostic perspective across industries, and there's definitely lessons that can be learned that we can leverage. Lastly, in terms of who are we as people, well, we are based in Denver, Colorado. That's where the vast majority of our staff are. We do deploy globally. So we have clients primarily that are based out of the United States that may have international locations, but we do also have a handful of clients that are based internationally. Typically, we have more experienced personnel. You have folks like me that started doing ERP back in the 90s and then have just continued on. I would say another piece of it is that Panorama as an organization puts a lot of value in continuing education. And so we sponsor our staff to get those additional certifications, such as your Six Sigma, your PMPs, your APEX, and folks that are going for their graduate degrees. And then finally, the 360 degrees ERP certified. That's just saying that as an organization, as a consulting services organization, we do have a codified methodology. And so we use a team-based approach, but every member of that team is following the same methodology. So that's a quick overview of who we are as an organization. This is just a couple of logos of clients, and what you'll see here is, again, it's a representation of all different types of industries, but you'll also see that there's all different sizes. Our smallest client has no revenue. They're a startup company for waste to energy, and our largest client is a $27 billion steel company. So our methodology scales across industries as well as across size of organization. And then finally, my last intro slide is just to say that we have Chris's team, and the purpose of Chris's team is to stay on top of everything that's going on in the ERP industry. There's a race to the cloud. Some companies are more successful than others. There's a constant mergers and acquisitions activity. There's a constant ebb and flow of software solutions that are being sunsetted and being developed. And so that is what Chris's team's focus is, to stay on top of everything that's happening in the industry. So with that quick introduction, taking a look at what is the purpose of this webinar. Well, it's very, very common that when folks first reach out to us, and I'm coming from the business development perspective, and they're like, oh, we've heard about SAP and Oracle, can you tell us about that? Well, there's a lot more than what we can give you back in an initial phone call and from a sales perspective. And so this is where we're going to dive into the objective, independent view of these leading tier 1 vendors. So SAP and Oracle are the big names that everybody knows. Over the last couple of years, Microsoft and INFOR have really moved up, and Chris is going to give you some kind of reasons behind why we now consider those in the tier 1 space. There are always strengths and weaknesses. There are trade-offs with the different solutions. And then as far as how we back that up, it's going to be based on that benchmark data that Chris is going to go through, taking a look at what are the actual results that we have heard back from our customers on. And at the very end, what we want to make sure you walk out with is a very realistic perspective and a realistic set of expectations if you are looking to embark upon an ERP selection implementation project. So that is the purpose of the webinar. So with no more further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Chris.
Great, thanks, Laura. And as we get into this, we wanted to note how we collected our responses. Panorama does quite a bit of surveys every year, numerous surveys, and our responses this year were collected between September and October of 2018. The polling was conducted via our website. It does include approximately 263 organizations that have either selected or implemented or in the process of implementing SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, or INFOR. And this does include organizations ranging from mid-size to large enterprise organizations as well. And as Laura had mentioned, across multiple industries and locations, that we received numerous responses. We'll start with an analysis of the vendor selection, and this is just a quick snapshot of the percentages that each of these vendors that we're seeing and were selected by our respondents. So you can see over here on the left-hand side, a large portion of those, about 30%, are selecting SAP. SAP truly is the leader for Fortune 1000 companies and really has a foothold in that market. Oracle's strength, they are gaining market share and they are acquiring applications, advanced applications. One example that they just acquired, Logfire, which is an advanced WMS, and they're bringing that application into their cloud-based offering, which is expanding function and expanding, their reach. Microsoft is looking for companies that are a little bit less complex, but they maybe want a little bit, maybe more control and customization ability within their, within their install. And then INFOR, continues to be an innovator from the multiple products that they have in cloud consolidation. And they also have a lot of advanced functionality that could be leveraged on top of their out of the box implementations. So we're going to take a little closer look at each of the vendors and see what kind of came out of our surveys as we went through the year here. So we'll start with SAP, and again, the highest market share in the 1,000, Fortune 1,000, and certainly overall. That does come from their tier 1 type application, and there is probably some mixture of some of their smaller components, just as the other vendors have as well, but a majority of the information is from the tier 1 application. We see them as being shortlisted, the highest rate of shortlisted, and being shortlisted most often, leading into their selection. We see high benefits realization from SAP. They really put a focus on how they're going to pay for and get the return on investment from each of their clients. There's very specific benefits realization business case documents that they really adhere to and do a very good job of fleshing out. We see that they have the least amount of customization from our respondents. They also, ensuring a correct fit. Now, we've seen SAP Direct and also their system implementers do a very good job of taking a step back and really looking at the overall functionality that's needed from different organizations, and really making sure that they're properly scoping before we actually go into implementation. And that does ensure a correct fit for their application. And then lastly, the artificial intelligence from SAP, certainly a leader, and we are seeing more artificial intelligence come into play with SAP clientele, whether it be on shop floors, whether it be predictive analytics, machine learning, in the production, distribution environments, and even in professional services. Artificial intelligence from SAP is certainly an industry leader. Now moving on to Oracle. As Oracle continues to consolidate their product into the cloud, they are gaining on a daily basis really more and more functionality. So the Oracle Cloud, in theory was a basis of best practices from JD Edwards, from Oracle EBS, from the HCM components and the CRM components. And they're, again, every day they're still developing more functionality into that cloud. So they're certainly gaining coverage and gaining new clients in the cloud offering there. They do have more coverage for a lower tier 1 and upper tier 2 type organizations, meaning it's a little bit more flexible. Maybe the cost of entry is a little less significant than an SAP. So more complex upper tier 2 organizations are able to implement Oracle Cloud at a reasonable rate. And we're noting here the SI's ability to enhance for niche functionality. So where Oracle does lack in that new functionality being built into the cloud, the system integrators are certainly swooping in and establishing the last mile of functionality, whether it be product extensions or some personalization configuration. The system integrators' ability is absolutely there to enhance any of those shortfalls that we see. One thing that we've seen from our respondents is the cloud commerce. Oracle is certainly a leader in cloud commerce. So when we're talking, retail, supply chain management, some of those predictive analytics and demand forecasting and whatnot, those are all going to be coming into play, and Oracle is a leader here. Oracle's artificial intelligence platform is strong. We do see a little bit more actual use of artificial intelligence with some other vendors. We think Oracle, maybe the overall encompassing application is very complex, and it is hard to truly implement automated workflows, notifications, triggers, alerts, and whatnot, wrapping that into the use of artificial intelligence. We're going to jump to Microsoft here, and Microsoft, as Laura had mentioned earlier, certainly a newer tier 1 player, so they really can take on large organizations and large corporations, and they have also good upper tier 2 coverage. So, companies that are mid-size and they have a fast growth curve or they have some complexities, it's a very good fit for. They did rewrite their application into the cloud, and again, like Oracle day by day, there's more functionality being represented in there, and their SIs, their value-added reseller channel, certainly can write a lot of that last mile IP and that last mile functionality. And that's where you can see they rely pretty heavily on the partner ecosystem, just as they had previous years, to really focus in on that. What is that intellectual property that a certain industry or a certain organization may need to meet their complexity? Microsoft certainly leads with a technology stack focus. So we're looking at the Microsoft AI, but we're also looking at the Office use, the D365, all of their infrastructure being rewritten in Azure, very stable platform, and all of their applications in that new technology. Microsoft comes together as a whole family of products, and that's really their focus, is that technology stack, and ERP being one piece of that puzzle. And then INFOR, we do see that INFOR from our surveys has more predictable implementations, so it's easier to identify what we are implementing per functional area and how long it's going to take. Now INFOR does have complete coverage, we see in the tier 1 and tier 2 space, meaning that they have out-of-the-box functionality that can certainly facilitate the management of a large, complex, multi-billion-dollar company, but they also have additional advanced functionality that can be layered on top of their out-of-the-box processes and functionality to get really that true enterprise-type management application. Here's where we're looking at standard versus advanced functionality. We see a lot of standard functionality being implemented in phase 1 and the initial project, and a lot of our customers are seeing many benefits just from a standard INFOR implementation, and then they're growing into the system, adding either the demand plus forecasting or enterprise asset management, maybe a product lifecycle management application on top of that as a phase 2. INFOR's combination of a direct model and an SI channel is certainly helping them grow and gain market space. They are taking on all sorts of implementations direct, and then they also have a small handful of very vetted value-added reseller system integrators that have been proven for their tier 1 M3 or LN products there. And then the practical use of AI, we do see our customers and the respondents in the survey adopting the use of Coleman, or the perceived use of Coleman, a little bit better. So INFOR, through their messaging of the use of artificial intelligence, mixing it with the workflow automation and system, notification and alerts, they're really able to show their customers how they are going to be able to leverage and learn AI in the future. Some of the key considerations when evaluating vendors we see in our projects and also come out in our surveys are obviously the software functionality. So you really need to understand how in-depth the functionality goes in order to meet your organization requirements. Another key differentiator is the deployment options. Now we look at most of these vendors still have an on-premise flavor of their software. Most of the vendors have a hybrid option where maybe something is in the cloud, one functionality is in the cloud, and there are still some applications, maybe a shop floor control application that's on-premise and within your four walls. So understanding the deployment options, whether it be SaaS, whether it be a cloud or on-prem or a hybrid combination of each, is very important. It's also very important to understand where they've come from and how they've developed those cloud applications. Are they completely rewriting it into the cloud and the new technology? Have they just kind of cloud enabled their old product, their on-premise product, and kind of doing some hosting methods behind the scenes to make it a SaaS or a cloud model? Very important to understand there. That also affects how you're going to be self-sufficient and how you're going to maintain and enhance the product from that standpoint. And then the vendor and product viability, obviously each Each of these vendors is very viable in the market space as a whole. All their tier 1 products are also very viable in the market space. You certainly don't want to invest in a product or an add-on product that may be acquired by a different vendor or that may be sunset in the future. So it's important to understand the future of those products and the vendor themselves. And then, you know, an informed decision when selecting software does require an understanding of what your current requirements are. So process mapping for current state and future state is going to be very important for you to flush out as an organization before you actually go down the path of selection and implementation. And part of that is a digital strategy. As Laura mentioned earlier, where do each of these vendors fit in your organization's digital strategy, and where are they at in the puzzle, because each puzzle piece is a little bit different.
So one thing to think about here, I had a conversation this morning and someone was saying, well, can you tell me if this is a good EMR system? And we're talking about electric medical records software. And my answer to him was, well, there's basic functionality. You can say yes or no, it does this task. But at the end of the day, what Chris just mentioned about, you need to understand your organization's needs in terms of what are the requirements, the functional requirements that you have, what are your business processes, and that's going to drive more what the best solution for you is versus just saying, I want to buy the best pair of shoes. It's the best pair of shoes because they fit you and what you need to do with your feet. It's the same thing with ERP. These are all solid software solutions, but making the right decision on which one of these tier 1 products might be right for your organization, you've got to go back to the basics of what do we need the technology to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for pointing that out. So now we take a look at implementation duration, and this is the amount of time that it's taking to implement these different systems. So we kind of pulled out the high and the low here. On average, SAP implementations are taking the longest. They're approximately 14 to 15 months. But you look at who's implementing these and what are the reasons there. Usually it's a global organization, it's a global enterprise who are implementing, and they have a lot of complexity. Typically, maybe it's a large global footprint within the supply chain management that needs to be fleshed out and understood. So again, the key features and scalability is important to understand here. And then on the flip side, we said that INFOR did have the more, most of the more predictable implementations. And you can say that they're taking around, on average, 11 months for our clients or our respondents to implement an INFOR Tier 1 type system. Here, the reasons for that is really minimizing the customizations and taking advantage of out-of-the-box configurations. Each vendor is going to be a little bit different on the best practices and out-of-the-box configurations that they have per functional area, but these are certainly areas that if we can leverage those and take advantage of those, that is going to reduce the duration, therefore reducing the risk and the overall cost of the implementation. And what we're going to do is just drill down on those implementation accelerators just a little bit. Each of the organization and vendors that we have mentioned have their own, kind of their own spin on the implementation accelerators. Again, the purpose here is to try to standardize and implement more of best practices that these vendors and also what Panorama sees, in your industry, and that again will reduce the cost and the time to implement that. So looking at, how do we get standardized? Maybe it's a conglomerate of entities that there's a parent company, and maybe you want to start to centralize or have some shared services. And that's one of the first most important issues to identify is, for example, can we centralize our purchasing? Right now maybe you have 4 different entities. They may all have different purchasing processes and approvals. Can we actually standardize those and can we centralize those? Therefore, each of those entities is going to basically go through the same process of procurement. Now, these best practices, this is the higher rates of adoption, not only within the software, but higher success rates of implementation when more best practices are leveraged. So again, these are the out-of-the-box best practices. Each vendor varies in the maturity of their best practices, but the vendors kind of take a why not mentality. So when you're going into your design phase, They basically pop up a process that's standardized out of the box, and they're going to ask you, where do you differ, and then why can't you adopt this type of standardization or this type of best practice. Then you have a dialogue of why you're there. Usually what we see when people peel back the onions, the different layers of complexity usually tends to be a result of legacy system limitations and or years of workaround, and a lot of the stuff is tribal knowledge from the end users.
And this is one of those things when we're doing the requirements gathering and we're mapping your business processes, and then we start discussing, this is your current state. Where do you want to be with your future state? We want to talk about the what are you doing and why, not the how. And so the how is what these best practices are going to drive moving forward.
Yep, absolutely. Now looking at what best meets your strategy, so certainly imperative to put a digital strategy together. And what we're seeing with these large vendors and large enterprise type organizations, they're prioritizing what functional areas need to be met. So for example, we have human capital management listed, we've got product lifecycle management, supply chain management, and enterprise asset management. Now, each organization may have a different view of what's most important to them. Some manufacturing and distribution groups, the supply chain management is very, very imperative. So therefore, that's really going to lead the selection to what ERP system is going to be implemented. And what we see is companies looking for phase 2 and phase 3 functionality. Maybe they don't have to define all those processes now to a T. Maybe they're not able to assess and analyze each of those ancillary products from the family, but at least they're getting confidence that an Oracle can take care of, all of the functional areas eventually that we're going to need, or an SAP, it goes across the board from human capital through the product life cycle, and we know that we can add that advanced functionality in the future. So we're certainly seeing a single platform as a preference. A lot of the times our customers and our respondents, they want that database agnostic type of view. So they would prefer in most cases to be able to work on an AWS platform or maybe a Microsoft Azure platform, but they don't necessarily need that vendor's ERP. So staying agnostic is important. Other examples, maybe somebody from an Oracle, it's an Oracle shop and all their resources, IT, are Oracle, Oracle based or Oracle skill sets there. So that would, maybe lead you down the Oracle platform rather than one of the other vendors. And then most important, I think, is a cultural fit. So, what our customers and our respondents are looking for is a true partnership. Not just a sales transaction, but a true partnership of learning the business, learning the strategies, understanding the vision, and then figuring out what piece of the puzzle can that vendor fit, now and in future phases. I always push the thought of having a very good relationship with your vendor, because you always need that extension to reach out to when you have questions, you have doubt, or you have concerns. It's always great to have a good relationship with any of your vendors. Now, some of the business initiatives included in the digital strategy. So when we're asking this to our respondents, how do each of these vendors fit into your digital strategy with the products that they offer here? And you can see from ERP, the second column there, the second graph, that pretty high percentage for those applications. And then you're going down, maybe omni-channel, e-commerce, maybe that's less of a priority, or maybe that's a future phase, and maybe it doesn't necessarily fit into their actual strategy. So this kind of shows, what companies were looking to include from a vendor into their strategies. Now, looking at your engagement team and all of our clients, when they're going into implementation, pre-implementation planning, the biggest question is, what's the resource, what's the internal resource allocation, and it's always a struggle from our people to understand how many FTEs do we really need on this project, either through design and through training and through conference room pilots. How much of our people's time do we really need to dedicate and allow those people to be solely involved in the implementation and kind of relieve their day-to-day job, maybe have that backfill here. So depending on the vendor's customization and how flexible these applications are, maybe that does require less or more internal resource allocation. So it's certainly critical to understand in these actually, when you really flush out an implementation plan, it may actually lead you to lean towards one vendor over another if you really understand what that internal resource allocation looks like and if you're ready to dedicate those resources. This is the role of software in digital strategy. So you can see here again, was their selection and looking at this vendor part of their digital strategy? And yeah, some interesting responses here, but you can see from an INFOR and an SAP standpoint that those are kind of the leaders, and maybe that's why they leaned or ended up choosing one of those applications, is that they believe that vendor truly aligns with their digital strategy there. All right, so that was kind of a preview of some of the highlights that we found within our report. And again, it'd be great if you downloaded the report and get a little bit more detail, or even reach out to us, as Laura had mentioned. But in conclusion, it's very important to understand each of the offerings and the platform from each of the 4 vendors. So each vendor, again, has their strengths and weaknesses. We just need to identify what the trade-offs are, and maybe that, some trade-offs are, more IT staff that we need for more control over, to be more self-sufficient, to enhance our own product, or, we want less. We want to rely more on the vendor, and we want to go fully in the cloud, and we want the vendor to really take care of those IT type activities. And then considering the challenges of their software and how it's going to align with your organizational goal. Again, whether it be agnostic on a data platform, or whether it be all in on one vendor, you need to make sure that the vendor understands and is going to align with your strategy and then the goals. And then implementing new technologies, are certainly more apt to success by taking a step back. All too often, people try to make a decision on a vendor, they jump in very quickly, and they're not aligning processes properly. They're not taking all the steps that they need to really ensure proper planning and to set the implementation project, the kickoff, off with success, and really what are those expectations throughout the implementation there.
So that's a really interesting thing, Chris. So for those of you that are listening, if you've got a question, I invite you to go ahead and type it in and we'll read it out. So the first question is actually very much along those lines. It says, can we select a tier 1 vendor on name and industry presence alone, knowing the vendor will figure it out?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question there. And I would say, not necessarily. So each instance and each organization is very unique. All too often in our large enterprise type clients, there's either board members or C-suite, C-level executives that have a lot of experience with one or maybe even 2 vendors. So they're a little bit biased towards that. What we've seen, it does kind of come back and bite them in the end, because you really should be selecting software and implementing software based on your unique needs and your processes and your internal resources as well.
All right, here's another one. Let's see. Are there any other vendors that should be considered tier 1?
So as Laura had mentioned, we certainly see INFOR and we see Microsoft coming up and not only playing in that upper tier 2 space, but certainly a legitimate player in the tier 1 space. There is one other application out there that we do see called IFS, and they're kind of in that gray area of being on the verge of lower tier 1 and upper tier 2. So IFS is another one that's up and coming. They're getting more traction here in North America. They do have a pretty good global footprint in Europe and across the pond there. but they are gaining market share, and they're a pretty complex type of system as well. Not as complex as maybe an SAP or an Oracle, but certainly very flexible and from a technology standpoint, still a leader on what they can do as far as workflow automation and even that user experience.
All right, so here's one. So where is your cutoff between a tier 1 and a tier 2?
So, a lot of people try to put a revenue metric on it. Maybe, typically we look at tier 1 companies that are 750 million and above, multi-billion, and then also number of employees. If you really start to peel back the onion on functionality, it's how much complexity do we have. We've certainly seen, companies that are, we'll just say $250 million, but they have a huge global footprint. They have a very complex supply chain. They have a complex manufacturing, process. So, I don't necessarily like to tag, revenue or employee numbers to tier 1. You kind of look at more of what industry are you in, what functionality do you need, and how complex are you.
All right, so we'll give it another minute to see if there's any other questions that come in. And while we're waiting, we talked earlier about getting some free consulting. So if you are interested in spending an hour with our consulting team, just go to our Contact Us page on our website, which is panorama-consulting.com. And there's a place for you to put comments in there on how it can help. Just type in the code free hour, and then we will get back with you ASAP to set up a time to speak with Chris or someone else on our team. So again, we'll give it another second to see if there's any other questions that come in. In the meanwhile, if you have any other questions, if you'd like to reach out to me directly, I'm Laura Florence, the Director of Business Development here. You can reach me at the email and the phone number on your screen.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.